Hi, everyone. My name is Kirk Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. Today, I'm speaking with Francois de Melogue, a jack of trades, reformed chef, recipe developer, cookbook author, and photographer. Chef Francois comes to the table with over 30 years of cross-cultural culinary experience and quite an impressive history. After graduating top of his class from the notable New England Culinary Institute, he began his career in a number of highly acclaimed kitchens across the country. This includes the Bakery in Chicago, Old Drover's Inn, and Joel Robuchon Gastronomie in Paris. He also opened award-winning Pili Pili in his hometown of Chicago, Illinois, rated in the top 10 new restaurants in the world by Food and Wine magazine in 2003. So join me today as I chat with Chef Francois about becoming a proper gourmand, how he overcame major career setbacks, and advice for the next generation of chefs and cooks. And there he is. Good morning. How are you, Chef?
I am fantastic. I hope you're doing well as well.
I am. If I was any better, I'd be you. This is the highlight of my week, possibly my year. I am really, really excited to chat with you today. I've got to jump right in because your set looks a little sexier than mine. You've got, I could tell we're going to talk about photography in a minute, but fill us in on what's over your right shoulder there. Are you ready to do some photography today?
Sure. Yeah, I have actually, I have lights, studio lights, my tripod, different backgrounds. And then over on the other side, I have my overhead camera for taking top-down shots.
I love it. I love it. And you are, tell us about the setting. You're in Vermont right now, right?
Yeah. When COVID hit, I moved out to Vermont.
Got as far east as you could.
Right, exactly. They told me the cold would stop the spread of COVID.
So you insulated yourself. I love it.
That's it.
I love it.
I've always loved Vermont, so it was a good opportunity for my wife and I to uproot and move out east. So
fantastic. Well, this is going to be fun today because we exchanged a few notes before we started recording, and we're both Chicago chefs, Chicago people, and those are special people, right? So I look forward to rehashing that. I would be remiss if I did not thank Chef Beau MacMillan. It was such an interesting chat when we got to know Chef Beau and how passionately and thoughtfully and kindly he spoke of your friendship and the training and advice that he received from you. So feel free to jump in and talk about Beau. Any special memories about Beau? And for our audience, Beau MacMillan of the Sanctuary in Arizona, and so much more. Also larger than life as you are.
And first off, I have to clarify something. Beau is paid $50 every time he mentions my name. So
he's a wealthy man.
I know, exactly. Man. It's getting expensive. Beau's an amazing person. Beau started working for me as a prep cook and dishwasher. I think he was probably about 17 years old. And just as green as can be. But, I believe like people have a destiny. Beau was always destined to be this great culinary, force of nature. But I feel like I got to like imprint him just a little bit.
I can see some of the the reflection for sure. Let me say too that I was looking at some of your work online last night with my wife, and we're going to talk about all of this, but you're an artist, you're a chef, you create magic on the plate, but your photography is absolutely stunning. So and your Instagram site is unbelievable. So before we dive into, the history, how does a chef, transform themselves into becoming a photographer?
The funny thing is, when I was a little kid, and when I was 11, I bought my first camera at 12. I bought a Canon AE1. My stepfather actually took classes from Ansel Adams. And so as as a little teeny kid, I was really influenced by him. And it got me into photography at a young age. because of my roots, my French roots, which I know we're going to talk about later. Cooking was my main call, and I believe they're both art forms. I mean, just like Jacques Pepin is an artist, right?
Yeah.
Like
He's
a
Savoy.
phenomenal artist.
Yeah.
So, I think it just was the natural continuation of my career as I got older to kind of lose the restaurant side, do the writing of cookbooks and then photography.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's not wait so long with
Sure.
the background. You grew up in Chicago. I detect a little bit of a Chicago accent, which I love. We'll practice saying hot dog in a little bit, but tell us, did the family come over from France in the 60s or so, or tell
Yeah,
us about your family a little bit.
sure. Both my parents came over in the 50s.
Okay.
My mother came from a restaurant family. And it's funny because my mother never lost France. Like, even though she lived in America for more of her life, like there was just the strong French connection of like going shopping every single day.
I
Forget
love it.
that we have giant refrigerators here.
The only place in the world that does too, by the way.
Yeah, I know. It's an interesting concept when I go back to France, but so I really grew up like kind of on the fence between French culture and American culture. And I mean, it's just really my mother's influence on me growing up. I mean, I have a million stories I could tell you. Like my stepfather was an eye surgeon, and a doctor was retiring, and the doctor was not really well liked, so they gave him a live turkey as a gag gift. Now, my mother, being a French woman, very thrifty, nothing goes to garbage, she took the turkey home. So here we are in our apartment in Chicago with a live turkey, and it lived long enough for my mother to get the courage to kill it. And
Unreal.
Yeah, I mean, and the funny story actually about that is my mother was holding the turkey's neck on a cutting board, and she had this giant or Chinese cleaver, and she went up to swung down, and the turkey saw what was about to happen and moved his head over, and my mom ended up cutting off the top of her finger. And
oh my gosh, karma.
Kicked the turkey out the door, and it went last seen running across the south side.
Unbelievable. That was a great time, 50s and 60s. My folks came over from Germany in the early 60s, and a lot of immigrants and a lot of great food in Chicago, although they didn't get the credit for it, right, in those early days. Lots of meat and potatoes. But it sounds like foie gras was probably on the table quite a bit in your household.
Not so much foie gras, but the funny thing is, like in Chicago at that time, like my mom cooked sweetbreads or liver or like the kind of the cuts of meat that wasn't really popular in our country yet.
Sure.
And she would have to ride her bike off into the ghetto to buy these cuts at like some of the African American markets, because they weren't sold in like the mainstream grocery stores. I mean, it's really interesting to think how different it is now.
Well, and some of those traditions just, they stay with immigrants when they come. I went to school with, liverwurst sandwiches and Black Forest tort, while, my friends had bologna sandwiches and Hunt snack pack, right? So at the time, you didn't realize, wow, I'm different, but boy, I wouldn't change anything, right, for that. I would leave the flat that we lived in, go down in the bakery, say hi to my dad and all the bakers, and walk through the front and get my lunch on the way out, and off I went to school. It's kind of what we did right back then. You
knew you were different when you tried to trade your school lunch of a liverwurst sandwich to the kid next to you. And he's like, what?
Well, the Black Forest tort was popular, I'll say that. I want to come back to Beau in a second too, but as soon as we got on, you made a comment about Marco Pierre White, and so many chefs do, so many guests do, and so I just wanted to give you an opportunity. I'll tell you a quick story, but you go first on the impact of Marco Pierre White, who's right back here, always looking over my shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, Marco Pierre was the man for a long period in kitchen life. I mean, we kept a copy of White Heat sitting in the kitchen, just like poring over all his recipes, obviously, but it was more his approach to life and his philosophy. I mean, really, he paved the way for people like Anthony Bourdain, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Certainly
yeah.
being outspoken about food and culture.
It's great. Last week we chatted with James Porter, who's another degree of you, right? Having worked with Beau for a lot of years. And I told a quick story of it's probably a decade ago now. I was walking down the street in Dublin with my wife. It was her birthday. And I had no idea that he had a restaurant in Dublin. I was just telling her the story, my wife Gretchen, the story of White Heat and Marco Pierre White and getting the Michelin stars and then giving him back and kind of the way he behaved in the kitchen and all that kind of stuff. And then lo and behold, we get to the end of the block. I look over to the left and there it is. Marco Pierre White Steakhouse. Unbelievable. We didn't get in that night, but we got in the next night. And that photo is actually the menu. That's the menu that everyone gets. And they were happy to give me a signed one. He wasn't there, but I just had to acknowledge that. It's either motorcycles, music, or Marco Pierre White for every chef guest that I have on the show. But let's come back to Beau because it connects to your background. Talk a little bit about how you took him under your wing. And I think that was at the tea room, right? The Cranebrook tea room.
Tea room, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, like I said, when Beau came on, super green, still in high school, didn't really know anything about cooking. And I feel like it's a chef's responsibility to mentor young kids that come in the kitchen. And you're locking into an agreement when you hire somebody that has no experience.
Yeah.
It's not like hiring some guy who's worked the line for 20 years for Daniel Boulud in New York City, and you're expecting him to perform. But for the young people coming into the kitchens, it's our responsibility as chefs to mentor them and to take them under your wing and teach them and guide them. And like I said, I honestly believe this. Beau would have been who he is today without me. I just think I helped him maybe, learn the cooking side and get there quicker. I mean, Beau's an awesome guy. Love him.
Well said. Well said. You're very, very humble. Let's talk a little bit about where you are now too, because that's also fascinating. Maple syrup capital of the world. It's actually St. Albans, Vermont, right?
Yep.
So tell geography wise, where is that in Vermont?
I'm 16 miles from the Canadian border.
There you go. There you go.
And here's another interesting fact. St. Albans was the butter capital of the world in the 1850s.
Isn't that something?
More butter was produced here than anywhere else in the world, which blew my mind.
I love that. So what's the culinary scene like there? Any must-sees, any restaurants, anyone else hiding up there that we don't know about?
My favorite set of restaurants are a restaurant group, and I don't know the name of the group, but they have Hen of the Woods up here, Doc Ponds, Prohibition Pig. Awesome restaurant group. They really do food right. But I think the real beauty is nowadays we're living in a time like when you and I were young, you were either a French restaurant or you weren't.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to be in the upscale French restaurants. That was like the only direction to go. And we live in this awesome time right now where there's all kinds of restaurants, and they're not just Michelin starred. There's, little hole in the walls. And so as I've gotten older, that's what I really like finding is like the little spots, not the big famous spots.
I love that. Folks that are sourcing locally, but not putting it in the newspaper every day. It's just what they do. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, let's talk a little bit about you. We talked a little bit about your upbringing and where your folks came from. And, but what was it like for you, Chef Francois, growing up in let's say a free-spirited kitchen? Were you at the counter a lot?
Yeah, I was. Totally. I was telling you earlier about how my mom would ride her bicycle into the ghetto. And it's funny because like here's this, she's a little teeny French lady, and under 100 pounds, thick French accent, and had no fear whatsoever. And she loaded me and my sister on the back of her bike and off to do her grocery shopping. And so that same kind of fearless style translated into the kitchen at home, even though she was very rebellious, which made it great because she didn't feel bound to follow a recipe perfectly. A lot was intuition, a lot of it's really what we do in kitchens now. You make your menu based on what you have, what's fresh in season, what the farmers are growing, the ranchers are raising, rather than, you have this set menu you want to do, and you want to have watermelon in February, even though it's not the season, kind of thing.
I love that. Did your mom's rebellious nature and her intentionality in the kitchen become part of who you were who you are still today as a cook, as an artist?
Yeah, and I think I think it's a good thing for people to learn to, because as being a chef, everybody who is attending your school at some point is going to face themselves in a kitchen where something doesn't go right. The main course, the meat for the main course on a catering event didn't come, and you got a punt in the fourth quarter. And so that style of just kind of like adapting to your situation is so needed in the restaurant business. Sure, you have your intention, here's what you want to do, but we all know things happen and you have to adapt to it.
I love that. And the reason I bring it up, again, to sort of self-reflect a little bit, my father came over in the 60s, like I said, as a master pastry chef. He made his Meisterbrief in Dusseldorf before he came over. That was the goal. And always with an intention to go back to Germany eventually. But the reason I bring it up is, we had a restaurant in the mountains of Colorado, in the 80s and 90s. And, his style was, as you can imagine, as a pastry chef, was very organized. I mean, he was working 3, 4, 5 days ahead, right? And I was a lot more whimsical on the other side of the line, right? I didn't want to commit to a menu. My dad wanted a printed menu. Like, it's got to be static. I got to organize it. I got to order everything. And I was a lot more free back then, right? So we kept the line between us. That's how we had a healthy relationship. I mean, my father would come in and just quiz me on things like, hey, so what are you going to do if we lose power? What are we going to do today if, the gas goes out? How are you going to take care of the guests? And I never thought about that stuff, right? So I'm glad that he asked those questions, because I think about those things today when I have students in the building, right? So our parents are so influential. When you decided, Chef, to go to school to formalize, were you nudged by your family, or was that something that it's just in the DNA? I'm going to go to culinary school and I'm going to do this for a career.
I'm going to answer that two ways. So my father was the opposite of my mother. My father was very aristocratic, very proper. You didn't become a cook because at that time that was a working man's job.
Sure.
So my father did not want me to go to cooking school. And so I remember looking at Gourmet magazine, and in the back, Nicky, New England Culinary, had an ad for it. And I filled that out because I knew I was going to become a cook. That was what I wanted to do. And I ended up getting a scholarship to Nicky.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I definitely wanted to pursue the education at a cooking school.
I love it. I love it. And, a lot of our listeners, from and with Escoffier, a lot of students will listen to our chat, and not to put you on the spot, but I'd love for you to be able to chat, if you wish, of how culinary school impacted you, not just your career, but this idea of meeting new people in a new place, because you were at Chicago at the time, right? And
yeah.
then you relocated over to Necky to go to school. How did that experience, specifically culinary school, impact your life?
Profoundly, profoundly. I mean, in life, you could go two ways. You could do an apprenticeship in a kitchen, and that's certainly a noble way to do it. Or you can go to cooking school and you kind of get your career. If you put your nose into the books, really study, learn how to use your knives, all the things that you're going to learn in cooking school, you're going to get where you want to go faster. And not only that, you're surrounded by people that are very passionate about the cooking world. And so you're going to get doors open for you in your career down the road. Louis Sethmary, who I went to work for at the bakery restaurant at a super young age as his executive chef, he came to Necky and lectured. And hearing Louis speak to me, I forged a friendship with him. I started writing him letters. I actually went and did 6 weeks of free work at his restaurant, a stage with him, because I was so amazed by him. And I would have never met Louis had I not been going to cooking school.
I love that story. Let's run with that a little bit. Again, we're going to be selfish here because we're both from Chicago, and you can't really talk about the history of food and a larger than life chef presence than Chef Louis, right? And the bakery restaurant, I think it was open for almost 30 years, tiny little place serving some of the most continental cuisine, in the world, right? And at one point it was one of the most destination restaurants in the world. What was it like? So you admired Chef Louis, you understood, where he came from, from Hungary, and all the work that went into his success. Your icon comes to the school, and then you're in the kitchen. Is it a different story when you're pumping it out behind the line?
No, it was even better. I mean, first of all, Louis had the largest cookbook collection in the world. So not only before we talk about the cooking side, whenever I had a free minute, I could go upstairs and crack open, 200-year-old cookbooks.
I love it.
And just have this wealth of knowledge. And not to mention that Louis himself, I mean, one of the most intelligent chefs I ever worked for, retained a lot of this knowledge. I mean, he was the bridge to the older level of cooking, that came in the early 1900s. And I mean, he was like a living connection to that, kind of like Paul Bocuse started with Mère Brazier, the world's first Michelin-starred chef with 2 3-star restaurants, for 66 years, a woman,
And I love this conversation. You're a historian and a storyteller. Keep going.
And so, when we had talked before, I told you the French concept of le feu sacré, or the sacred fire. And that's where, one generation of chefs teaches the next generation of chefs the basics, gives them the foundation to which they build on. And it's a French idea of the history and the knowledge of cooking going from one generation to another, through one kitchen in history to another. And, you can look back at the lineage and see where, today's great chefs came from back in history.
I love it. Perfect place for me to kind of jump in, right? So this is an Escoffier cookbook, and there's many, right? Le Guy, the greatest, the first, right? True story, chef. About a week ago, I get an email from someone on the East Coast in the Connecticut area, who happened to be in a bookstore and found this Escoffier cookbook. This one happens to be copywritten in 1941. She's not a chef, has no interest in going to culinary school, but she saw the book and thought it needed to be home. So she found me on the website, sent me the pictures, and I followed up and got the book. I love what you're saying about generations. You have a large cookbook collection as well, right?
Yep, I have over 2,000, probably
Un-
about 3,000 menus.
Unbelievable. Yeah, the menus is it drives my wife crazy. I have to hide them in the house now or bring them to my office, right? Because it's an experience, right? It's a memory. You can't. I've got menus all over the walls. It's on the floor. Spago,
Yeah,
the Little Nell and Aspen. Charlie Trotter, one of his
yeah.
originals. Chicago, another Chicago chef. I have to bring this up, not to put you on the spot, but I found this quote online. This is you. You said, "My goal is to share my passion for French home cooking and how the French like to eat." Chef Louis, your first mentor, taught you that people do not eat methods, they only eat results. I've never heard it put that way, but talk a little bit about that.
Well, let me start with Louis's quote. I was Louis had a very particular way of roasting a beef tenderloin. I mean, so remember, Louis's restaurants were very continental, very old school European, classic stuff. A lot of chefs would laugh at today, and I'll argue still is very relevant and great tasting.
Classic. Yep, yep,
But
yep.
he would wrap the beef in aluminum foil, and he would put a little gelatin on the outside before he did that. And I questioned him about it, and he goes, "If Escoffier had aluminum foil, he would have used it too." And so, that line about, people don't eat methods. We get so caught up in how something's done, and we forget the result, because if it doesn't taste good at the end,
It
who
doesn't matter.
cares how you made it? I don't care.
Yeah, yeah.
It's how it tastes in the end, and there's no way you're going to get to the end and have it taste good without good methods. That goes without saying.
It's all connected. Yeah. And I mean, what I love about that too, Chef, is that it has the customer in mind, right? It's really about the experience that the customer has at the table. The food has to taste good, as pretty as it is, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, you work with Joel Robuchon. Can you talk a little bit about that? Another incredible name in French cuisine.
Yeah, so in my Marco Pierre White era of like hero worship, pictures of Marco in the kitchen, Joel Robuchon was the other huge inspiration. What I loved about Joel Robuchon was he started out in very humble restaurants. Like I think he worked in truck stops, routiers, they call them in France,
Yeah,
before
yeah,
like
yeah.
going up into, the chef of the century by some people's account. And I was chef of a relais and chateau in New York. Back at the time, there was only I think 22 or 24 relais in the country. Um, and so part of the program with relais and chateau was you could go stage for, or you could go work for any other relais. And so my boss, Alice Pitcher, knew that I loved Joel Robuchon. So I'm going to France on vacation, right? And like the day before, she goes, "I got a surprise for you." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, you're not going on vacation. You're actually going to work for Joel Robuchon." And so, here comes a couple weeks of 20-hour days. They were only open 5 days a week, but absolute most profound experience in my life in a kitchen.
I
Uh,
love that, and not many people can claim that. I love it. Yes, definitely chef of the century by many people's assertions. 100%. So with you specifically, you went on to open. I think you opened your first restaurant in the early '90s, and you said that you got a Harvard education running a business. Did you? So at the time, did you feel? And again, this is for our students. Did you feel prepared to open a restaurant, to start a business, to impact the families that work for you? And would you have done anything? This is a loaded question. Would you have done anything differently, or did you follow your intuition and you did everything and you do it all the same again?
no, I one thing like Neki taught me really how to cook extremely well. I think the business side of the curriculum was lacking. And I know that's something after I left, that I was there the second year they opened. I know that's something that they were working on like expanding.
Sure.
But I think nothing truly prepares you for owning your own business as owning your own business. So here I was, very headstrong, like a lot of young chefs in the world, very headstrong, thought I knew everything, went in there, was going to take the world, like hostage or whatever, I was
By
going to
storm.
rule the
Yeah.
world. It was actually the same year Charlie Trotter opened his restaurant. I remember being in Charlie's kitchen before he opened, which was a couple months before mine.
Oh, wow. Wow. I've got chills hearing that. Wow.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah, I walked in the day they were prepping like duck confit. I mean, I was like, wow, that's yummy. It could dive in that thing of duck fat. But yeah, and then when you realize when you own your own restaurant or anybody opening their own business, that you're also now the accountant. So not only as chef, you're working 18-hour days, 16-hour days, whatever. Now add on accountant, bookkeeper,
HR,
repairman, HR,
Yeah, it's a lot. Any and again, you don't have to go into detail, but any trials and tribulations that you can share, any challenges in those early days?
Yes. Well, 3 months into the restaurant, I was out riding my motorcycle actually.
See, chef, motorcycle, music. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and then I had a semi hit me on the
Oh
Dan
my
Ryan.
gosh. Oh my gosh. On the
And
Dan Ryan.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. So probably going 75, 80 miles an hour.
He was going about that fast. I was going about 50 because I was just about to get off the highway to go into Hyde Park. Got sideswiped, hit and run, left for dead on the side of the road.
Oh my gosh.
I won't go into all of that, but I was out of my restaurant for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so the hard part then came. No critic in Chicago wanted to write about our restaurant because nobody thought we could survive like the owner chef getting hit by a truck and being out of the restaurant for 6 months. And so, we got absolutely no play in the press whatsoever, which really sucked. It hurt because I felt like we were doing really cool stuff. We had a very loyal clientele, but it made the whole struggle feel like, pushing this giant rock up a mountain the whole time. And it sadly, that was our demise. 2 years into it, we closed.
Yeah.
But, I learned a lot because the thing in life, you get knocked down. It's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up again.
I love that. That's well, I'm so glad that you're sitting with us today and that you survived that and you learned some things. And then so after that accident, you opened another restaurant, the French restaurant, right? Pili Pili. Serendipitous story to share, super quick. Our vice president of academic affairs here at Escoffier, and it just it shows how the circle, you've touched so many people throughout your career. So when she grew up in Chicago as well, father was a fireman, and she worked at your restaurant with Fred Ramos back in the day, and then they both went on to work with Michael Foley at Printers Row. You remember when Printers Row was always in the newspaper, always in magazines? I mean, talk about getting press.
Yeah.
Michael Foley and I want to say that he then Fred worked for you, right?
No, actually, when I was leaving Pili Pili, Fred was coming over to replace me.
Oh, got it. Okay, so he came in
that
after
was
you.
After it was actually on the other side. It was when Michael Foley was closing Printers Row. Like, that had been like a Chicago institution forever.
Yeah. Did your beliefs around, and again, sorry to bring this up, it's just fascinating to me. Did your beliefs around the restaurant business, specifically critics, change a little bit through that experience that you had?
Yeah, like I said, I got really negative about it, and I started, when I think critics should be critical, but they're also have to nurture and help businesses. They're part of the life cycle of a restaurant.
Sure, sure.
When Pili Pili started, we were the darlings of the media. I was in London newspapers, Japanese newspapers, all the Chicago ones. We were on TV, every month. And
were you a little cautious? Were you a little cautious?
A little bit, but it's like you can't, if you hold grudges in life, you're going to be this angry guy in the kitchen, and there's enough.
And that's not good. That's not good. Yeah,
in life to like be angry, and critics shouldn't be one of them. The one thing I find kind of interesting though about a lot of critics, and please critics don't hate on me for this one, but for a lot of critics in this country, the entry to that career is an English degree rather than a history of culinary things. I mean, I had some very prominent critics come into Pili Pili and write a story about some dish I made, and they got the history completely wrong, like in the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times. And it would eat me alive because I was very interested in that aspect of it. And I remember one time we had a critic come in, and everybody knows what the critics look like, even though they try to hide it, assume names, fake credit cards, these kind of things for the reservations. And so in the critic's meal, I tucked in a little note, like a little love note, or like you do for your kid, I love you, son, in the sandwich. And I was like, gosh. Hey, you got the history on this dish wrong. I just wanted to say,
just a little nudge. Yeah. That could be in a movie. That's super, super clever. Let's speed up a little bit to today. I mean, here you are in Vermont. You look fabulous. You've got your little studio there. What's the passion? Talk about your passion today. I hope that you talk about your photography because it's absolutely beautiful.
Well, a couple passions. Writing cookbooks. I've written 2 cookbooks so far, and
I have French cooking at home. I have French cooking. I don't have as many cookbooks as you. I want to say 500, but my wife periodically makes me either take them to the library or donate them here to the school. So they're around, but I do have yours still on the shelf at home.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh God, now I lost my train of thought.
No, it's what you're working on. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
There. Yeah.
Sorry. No, you said cookbooks, and I started thinking of all the cookbooks.
Go for it. Yeah. So is that still a passion? Do you still like writing?
Yes, I do. And my dream in my life is to write a definitive cookbook about the south of France, about Provence, where my mom is from.
Oh, I love it.
And one of the beautiful things also about this time is like, it's not just French cooking that's important anymore. It's cooking from Ghana, it's Jamaican cooking, it's the different ethnicities of Chinese food, or everybody's culture matters. African American culture, everybody's culture matters. And I think it's beautiful that people can tell their story, and that I want to tell my story, and it's my mother's Provençal roots. So that is something I want to work on, among a couple other books I'm currently working on. Then, like you said, I'm doing photography. I've been trying ever since I left the kitchens. I've been trying to figure out a way to stay related to food somehow, because it's what drives me. So my photography, not only do I like doing landscape photography, which pleases me, it's like making a beautiful dish in a restaurant that you're really proud of and putting it up for people to look at and to consume. But I also did a project of photographing different maple houses or sugaring operations in Vermont. I want to incorporate like all of this into histories. I want to give back to the food world and to people, like all these different food ways, and the just different parts of culture as related to food back to people, like especially like students at schools like yours.
I love that. Just a quick note too, and The south of France, boy, so absolutely beautiful, particularly Nice. Once a year, because of course that's the home of Escoffier as well. Actually, 10 kilometers away in Villers-le-Bay. So
Yeah.
just outside of Nice is where Escoffier grew up, and we actually have a museum there in that area. So once a year, we take a handful of students and employees down there just to meet with Michel Escoffier, who's the great grandson of Escoffier, who still curates his museum and all of that. So I totally agree. The weather, the food, the personalities of the people, it's like a different world, right? As they say, Nietzsche. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of Italy, it's kind of south of France, it's kind of its own Nietzsche. All right. Just a beautiful place. Do you go often?
Yeah, I'm actually going in a week.
No. Oh, I
But
love it.
but that museum, I almost got arrested there. Are you
Is that
kidding? Like all the pictures and the menus?
it's unbelievable, right?
There was
It's
only one security guy at the door. I thought I could grab stuff and just run.
if you do make it there, you have to let me know so I can let Michelle know, and he would love to meet with you. And they've done some additional work. When's the last time you were there?
I was at the museum 3 months ago. Or sorry,
Oh,
3 years ago. 3 years ago,
yeah.
right
So
before
since
COVID.
Yeah, so since COVID, there's a nice, beautiful courtyard where you can have a little peach melba and a glass of champagne, and they've redone, a few. There's 4 floors now. It's absolutely spectacular, and it's an entire day. It takes that long to get through, everything that they've curated there. It's absolutely fabulous, and it's
Um,
hard. I'm so glad that you said that, right? Because unless you've been there, it's so hard to understand. And they created a little garden as well, dedicated to Escoffier and his family as you walk into the museum. It's just spectacular. I'm going to send you some pictures. Yeah. So let me know if you're going over there.
sure,
I'm sorry, just keep going. I know we're getting close to time, but I've got so much to ask.
sure.
Um, I wanted to I wanted to talk a little bit about mentorship, right? So again, coming full circle back to Beau, because mentorship is so important. It's important to our students and the next generation. And I know it holds a special place in your heart. How, and in your words, again, not to put you on the spot, chef, but how can we pass the torch of knowledge from one generation to the next? When you and I went to culinary school, knowledge was kept in the toque, right? And so you had to go. Now knowledge is everywhere. It's everywhere. But any words of advice? We at Escoffier, we just launched a beautiful new food entrepreneurship program. So it's a program designed to sort of help young culinarians, um, you know, open a restaurant like you did, or to, create a startup, or to create a bakery, or, just something for themselves. Is there any advice from mentorship through, what to keep an eye on, what to focus on if you want to be an aspiring food entrepreneur?
Well, I mean, the quick answer is soak up everything. Be like a sponge wherever you are. Don't just sit back and take a job, as a externship, internship, or one of your early jobs in your career and just sit in the kitchen and just work. Ask the chef. You also have to, it's also your responsibility to challenge the chef a bit, and get him to show him that you love cooking, show him that you want to be there. You got to push for that as well. I would say also, I think about Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker,
Yeah.
and he had a concept of role modeling people. And you got Marco Pierre White, Joel Robuchon, Louis Sathmary, all these people in my life that I role modeled. I studied everything I could about Marco Pierre White. I had every single one of his books. I read them 50 million times. And I tried to be Marco Pierre White. I tried to learn his style through his dishes. I mean, you don't have to be necessarily in Marco's kitchen. Of course, that would help, but you can take the books that he wrote and just get that knowledge. Like, just be thirsty, always thirsty for more knowledge.
Lots of TikTok moments today on the call. I absolutely love it. Thirsty for knowledge, pun intended. Chef, we're getting close to the end, but before I let you go, the name of the podcast is The Ultimate Dish. So in your mind, and I think I know where you're going to go, what is the ultimate dish? Could be a memory or an actual dish. Putting you on the spot again.
No, well, okay. As I've gotten older, I've gotten back to simpler food, and I go back to the food of my roots. When I was 7, I had 2 pet rabbits, and they were kept in a cage by my family's restaurant. Now, no kid thinks about this, right? Yeah. And one day I go to play with them, and they were gone. And my grandfather and the chef of our restaurant was sitting there looking really solemnly and told me that they had escaped and gone for the better life, like, run off into a field. Now they're eating farmers' vegetables.
Yeah.
That day we had chicken for lunch. We had like that big French meal, and my grandfather had me sit down next to him, many courses, but the principal plate of that menu was a chicken dish with really long legs. And I remember I was eating about halfway through this really long chicken leg, and my grandfather stops me and he goes, "Francois, do you like the chicken?" And I'm like, "Oh, I love it." He goes, "It's your pet rabbits." And I'm like, "Really? Oh my God." Old school dish, rabbit with whole grain mustard, cooked with onions, and just like a nice braise. Very classic. That is my favorite dish.
The French, the Germans, Hassenpfeffer. I mean, it is a classic dish. I love it. You have been delightful to chat with, Chef. So glad to have met you. I'll reach out to Beau and give him a big high five for introducing us. I wish you well, and thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you. I'm so honored to be on your program. Really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast, where you'll find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. You can also browse other episodes and subscribe.